She has been covering bruises for 3 years. Foundation. Concealer. A smile that never quite reaches her eyes. Every morning, Alara Voss stands in front of a cracked bathroom mirror in a Chicago apartment and rebuilds herself from the wreckage her husband left the night before. She has learned to move quietly, to speak softly, to disappear inside her own life. But tonight everything she has survived, every scar she has hidden, every scream she has swallowed, is about to collide with a man who does not look away. A man the entire city fears, and the only question left is whether his world will save her or destroy what little of her remains. If this story already has you, like this video, drop your city in the comments and let me see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The rain started around 9 and by 10 it had turned mean. It came down in sheets across the downtown corridor, hammering the awnings of Michigan Avenue restaurants and turning the gutters into fast-moving rivers of dirty water and cigarette ends. Cabs splashed through intersections without slowing. Pedestrians hunched beneath umbrellas that the wind kept threatening to invert. The city moved the way it always moved in a hard October rain, irritable, indifferent, and in a hurry to be somewhere else. Inside Belladonna, none of that existed. The restaurant occupied the ground floor of a 12-story limestone building on West Randolph, a neighborhood that had spent the last decade being slowly reclaimed by money. Belladonna was the kind of place that didn't advertise, didn't need to. Its reservation list ran 6 weeks out on a slow month. The dining room seated 42 at maximum, each table spaced far enough apart for the kind of conversations that required distance. The lighting was warm and low. The acoustics were engineered for privacy. Everything about the space communicated one thing without ever saying it. You are safe here. You are seen here. You matter here. Alara Voss had worked here for 2 years, 4 months, and 11 days. She knew the count because she'd started on the day after Trent broke her wrist for the first time. She'd needed the money for the hospital copay that she'd told them was from a fall down the back stairs of their building. The attending physician had looked at her for a long moment before writing up the paperwork. He hadn't said anything. She hadn't expected him to. Now she stood at the server station near the back of the dining room, a small alcove tucked behind a panel of decorative glass, refilling a water pitcher while her eyes moved automatically across the room. Table 4 needed bread. Table 7's main course was running behind, and the woman in the green dress was beginning to show her impatience in the way she kept adjusting her silverware. Table 12 was fine. Table 12 was always fine. It was Niles Brandt's table, the restaurant critic who came in twice a month and ordered the same thing every time and tipped exactly 18%, never more, and Alara had stopped hoping for better from him around month 3. Her face was composed, professional. The smile she had cultivated over years of practice, warm enough to register as genuine, contained enough to require nothing in return. She had a gift for service, her manager Marcus had told her once, a natural. She made people feel attended to without making them feel observed. She thought about that sometimes, the way survival skills and professional skills could look identical from the outside. Alara. Marcus appeared at her elbow, mid-50s, trim, the kind of man who wore his authority quietly. Private luncheon tomorrow, noon, I need you on it. She turned. Full room? No, North Alcove? 7 covers? Mr. Vale's party? She didn't react. She had learned not to react to things that required more energy than she had available. What time do you need me in? 10, full setup. He's particular about the room temperature and he'll want to see the wine list before service. She nodded and wrote it in the small notepad she kept in her apron pocket, the one where she tracked section assignments and allergy notes and special requests. She didn't ask who Mr. Vale was. She already knew, the same way everyone in the city knew, not from personal acquaintance, but from the particular silence that settled over a room when his name came up. Nikolai Vale was not the kind of man whose reputation required explanation. It existed the way weather existed. You didn't question it. You dressed accordingly. Is there a security protocol? She asked. Marcus gave her a measured look. There's always a security protocol with Mr. Vale. His people will arrive 40 minutes early. Just let them do what they do. Don't engage, don't offer anything. When they're satisfied, you go in and finish the setup. Understood. And Alara. He paused. Full presentation tomorrow. Hair, everything. She understood what he meant without needing it spelled out further. She nodded once and turned back to the water pitcher and the room and the 31 minutes left in her shift. Outside, the rain continued. She took the bus home because the tip share that night had been underwhelming and the cab fare would have meant skipping lunch tomorrow. The 22 ran north along Clark, and she sat near the back, her server's apron balled up in her bag, her coat pulled tight. The bus was half empty at this hour. A few night shift workers, a teenager with earbuds bleeding thin music into the quiet, an older man asleep against the window with his chin on his chest. Alara sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the street outside and tried to assess the night ahead the way she always assessed it, the way you'd check the weather before walking out into it. Trent's pattern was inconsistent, which was the worst kind of pattern. When he drank heavily and lost at cards, the night was likely to be bad. When he drank heavily and won, the night was unpredictable, which was sometimes worse. When he didn't drink at all, he was cold and precise, and that had its own particular danger that she had learned to navigate over the years. The emotional violence on those sober nights was surgical. He knew exactly where to cut. She reached the stop on Devon and walked the 4 blocks to their building with her keys already out, her pace steady, her face neutral. Old habit. She had stopped walking like a person who thought about where she was going and learned instead to walk like a person moving through a space they already knew was hostile. Head slightly down, peripheral vision wide, steps quiet. The lobby of the building smelled of damp carpet and old cooking. She took the stairs instead of the elevator. The elevator was a metal box with no exit options, and Trent had used that fact once before. She unlocked the apartment door and stepped into darkness. The living room was empty. The television was off. She could see the kitchen light on through the half-open doorway, and she moved toward it carefully, registering the absence of music, the absence of the particular smell of whiskey that clung to the air after a night of serious drinking. Trent was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water. That was bad. He was 41 years old, lean and angular, with a face that had been handsome once and was now something harder. His hair was dark, going gray at the temples, and he hadn't shaved in 3 days. He was looking at his phone and he didn't look up when she came in. She put her bag down by the counter. "Hey, you're late," he said without looking up. She checked the clock on the microwave. 11:42. Her shift had ended at 11:15. Bus ride was 22 minutes. Walk was 8. She was on time. She was always on time. "Closeout ran long," she said, keeping her voice even. He set the phone down on the table. He looked at her. She recognized this particular version of his attention. Flat. Measuring. The kind of look that wasn't looking at her so much as cataloging her for later use. "Marcus keep you?" he asked. "I told you. Close out. You smell like their wine." She didn't. She had been behind the bar once all night for 40 seconds, and she hadn't been drinking. She knew better than to argue this. "I'm going to shower," she said. "Sit down." The kitchen was 12 feet by 9 feet. She knew these dimensions the way she knew the dimensions of every room in this apartment, not because she'd measured them, but because she'd calculated them in the dark, in the way a person calculates the boundaries of a space they might need to escape. The table sat in the middle. Trent was at the far end. The door was behind her. She sat down. He looked at her for a long time without saying anything. Outside, a car moved through the rain. A dog barked somewhere below. "Someone called the bar tonight," he said. "Looking for you." "Who?" "Didn't say." She kept her face still. "That's strange. I don't know who would—" "Don't." His voice was quiet. That was always the warning, not loud. Quiet. The way a room gets quiet right before something structural gives way. "Don't do that thing where you answer before you know what I'm actually asking." She waited. "A man," he said. "Not your coworker Marcus, not anyone from the bar. Someone who asked specifically for Ilara Voss and not Ilara Holloway." He paused. "Interesting, right? I haven't gone by Voss in 3 years. I don't know why anyone would—" "Stop." She stopped. The silence stretched. Trent picked up his water glass and set it down again without drinking from it. This was choreography she knew, the performance of restraint. He did it to let her understand how much he was choosing not to do. "I'm going to need you to be honest with me," he said, "about where you've been going, about who you've been talking to. Trent, I work, I come home. That's—" He moved fast. He always moved fast. It was the thing that had surprised her most the first time, how fast a man that size could move across a kitchen. The chair scraped back and he was standing, and she was already pulling away before he reached her. But there was nowhere to go in 9 feet of kitchen, and his hand caught her arm above the elbow, and his grip was very precise. 2 fingers and a thumb pressing in along the bone where it would leave the least visible mark. "I'm asking you a question," he said. His voice was still quiet. "No one called me," she said. "I don't know who that was. I don't know anyone who would—" He released her arm, stepped back. The distance he put between them was calculated, and she understood it was calculated. It was meant to make her feel the precariousness of the distance, the ease with which it could be closed again. "Clean yourself up," he said. "You look like you've been crying." She wasn't crying. She hadn't been crying. She stood up from the table and walked to the bathroom and turned the lock as quietly as she could, because the locking of the lock was always a separate provocation, and she had learned to make that sound disappear if she could. In the mirror, she assessed the damage the way she assessed everything now. Clinically, practically, looking for what needed to be addressed before tomorrow. The arm would bruise. Foundation could handle that. Her eyes were dry, but there was a look behind them. A particular look she'd started noticing in the last few months. Something that sat behind the professional composure and the survivor's stillness and the learned invisibility. It was the look of someone who had started to run out of places to hide inside themselves. She turned on the shower and sat on the edge of the tub and put her hands over her face and gave herself 3 minutes. Not to cry. She wasn't crying, just to breathe, to let the steam rise and the sound of the water cover everything else. 3 minutes. Then she'd get up. She always got up. The north alcove at Belladonna was a room within a room, accessible through a heavy wooden door off the main corridor designed for the kind of events where the host wanted complete separation from the rest of the dining experience. It seated 12 at the central table or 7 comfortably at a configuration that used the window wall, letting in natural light from the narrow alley that ran along the building's east face. It wasn't a beautiful view, but the light was good, and the room had a particular quality of stillness that larger spaces never managed. Alara arrived at 10:04 after covering the bruise on her upper arm with 2 layers of a full-coverage concealer she kept in her locker and had replaced 3 times in the last year. Marcus had the table set up half done. She took over without being asked, working through the linen placement and silverware alignment with the kind of automatic precision that came from doing the same task hundreds of times. She moved the candle arrangement twice until the sightlines from each seat were equalized. She checked the wine list against the cellar notes she'd been given and flagged 2 substitutions where stock had run short. She was recalibrating the thermostat when she heard the door to the alcove open. The men who came in first were not waitstaff. She registered this before she registered anything else. The way they moved, the particular economy of it, the way their eyes went to the corners of the room before they went anywhere else. 2 of them, both in dark clothing, one with an earpiece. They weren't threatening toward her, they simply proceeded through the space with a thoroughness that made her step back and stand still near the window. One of them checked the restroom attached to the alcove. The other opened the service door and looked into the kitchen corridor for 30 seconds and then closed it. They communicated with each other in a way that was almost entirely nonverbal. Small nods, a glance, a fractional tilt of the chin, and then the one with the earpiece looked at her. "You're the server for this event?" "Yes," she said. "You'll stay in the room during service. If you need to go to the kitchen, you announce it. You don't leave through any exit other than the main corridor door. Understood?" "Understood." He nodded once. They both stepped out into the corridor and she heard the low murmur of voices, and then the door opened again and the luncheon party came in. 5 men ahead of him, all in suits. The kind of suits that communicated not fashion, but authority, well-made, unshowy, chosen for durability of impression rather than effect. They settled into their seats with the ease of men who spent most of their professional lives in rooms like this one, negotiating things in carefully modulated voices over expensive food. Nikolai Vale came last. She had a picture of him in her head from the city's collective consciousness, the way a person has a picture of a landmark they've never visited. She knew he was in his mid-40s, that he was Russian-born, that his organization had been the subject of 3 federal investigations in the last decade, and that none of them had produced an indictment. She knew his name appeared in the Tribune occasionally, usually in contexts that required careful phrasing. She did not know what he looked like. He was taller than she'd expected. That was the first thing. Not imposingly tall, but tall enough that the room adjusted slightly to account for him. He wore a dark gray suit, no tie, a white shirt with the collar open one button. His hair was dark, cut close, with gray beginning at the temples. His face was not the face of a man who smiled much. Not because it was a hard face, but because it was a watchful face. The kind of face that had decided long ago that observation was more valuable than performance. He moved to the head of the table without consulting anyone and sat down with the ease of a man in his own living room. Alara moved into service. She poured water. She described the day's menu with the smooth professionalism Marcus expected. She brought the bread service. She took the wine order from one of the other men, who seemed to function as a logistics handler for the group. She did not make unnecessary eye contact. She kept her movements efficient and unhurried. She disappeared the way she'd learned to disappear, not by being absent, but by being so present and unobtrusive at the same time that the attention slid off her. The conversation at the table was not about anything she recognized or cared about understanding. Numbers, mostly. Names of companies she didn't know. References to meetings in other cities. The language of business conducted in the middle register. Not quite coded, but not quite plain either. She was taking the soup course away from the end of the table when Nikolai Vale spoke to her for the first time. "Miss," she stopped, turned. He was looking at her with a directness she wasn't prepared for. Not aggressive, not the way Trent looked at her. The cataloging look, the measuring look. This was something else. This was the look of a man who had seen something and was deciding what to do about it. "The bread," he said. "Could we have more?" "Of course." Her voice was steady. She had a very good voice for steadiness. She went to the kitchen and collected the bread service and came back and set it on the table and began to move away. And he said quietly, without raising his voice, not as a performance for the room, just as a direct thing between two people. "Who did this to you?" She stopped moving. The table had gone slightly quiet. Not completely. The other men continued their low exchange at the far end, but the immediate air around them had changed. She turned slowly. He was looking at her arm. Her left arm, where the sleeve of her shirt had shifted slightly during the bread service, and the edge of the foundation-covered bruise had become visible. Just the edge, just enough. She pulled her sleeve down. Her hands were very steady. She was proud of them for being steady. "I'm sorry?" she said. He looked at her. Not at the arm. At her. "I asked you a question," he said quietly. "I don't know what you mean," she said. He held her gaze for 3 more seconds. Then he looked down at the bread and broke a piece of it and said nothing further. She went back to the service station and stood there for a moment with her back to the room and breathed carefully, the way she breathed when she needed to hold herself together in a confined space. Slow in, slow out. She turned around. He was still looking at the bread. His face was composed and unreadable. But one of his men, the one who'd been sitting closest to him, a compact, hard-looking man with a broad face and a stillness about him that reminded her of weight at the bottom of deep water, was watching her with the specific attention of someone who had just received instructions. She didn't know that yet. She would understand it later. For now, she finished the service. She cleared the courses. She kept her sleeve pulled down and her face composed, and she got through the 2 hours without breaking anything or saying anything wrong or letting the shake she could feel building behind her sternum work its way up to somewhere visible. When the party left, she stood in the north alcove alone and collected the linen for the laundry service and wiped down the table and reset the silverware for the evening covers. Her hands shook, finally, in the empty room where no one could see them. She didn't tell Marcus. There was nothing to tell, she told herself. A guest had noticed something. She had deflected. It was over. She worked the dinner service. She went home on the bus. She found Trent asleep on the couch with the television on, a half-empty bottle of something amber on the coffee table, and she moved through the apartment with the particular silent expertise of someone who has learned to coexist with a sleeping predator. She lay in bed in the dark and stared at the ceiling. She thought about the question, who did this to you? She had been asked variations of this question before. A physician once who hadn't followed through. A neighbor the first year who'd moved out 3 months later. A coworker at her previous job. A woman named Dana who'd pushed carefully for about 2 weeks before Trent had called the restaurant and said things that had made Dana go very quiet and stop pushing. People asked. People didn't stay. She understood why they didn't stay. The calculus of involvement in someone else's situation was complicated, and most people didn't have the bandwidth for it. They had their own lives to maintain, their own troubles to manage. She didn't blame them. She had stopped blaming anyone for anything a long time ago because blame required the belief that things could have gone differently, and she wasn't sure she still had that. She turned onto her side. The rain had stopped. Through the window, the sky was the particular yellow-gray of a city night, never fully dark. She closed her eyes. In the morning, she thought. In the morning, she'd do the math on the month's expenses again and figure out where the medical copay could come from if she needed it. In the morning, she'd cover the bruise and put on the smile and go back to the restaurant and serve people food and wine and the comfortable experience of a world that worked smoothly, and she would do it well, and she would be fine. She was always fine. She was so tired of being fine. 3 days later, Marcus called her into his small office off the kitchen corridor and closed the door and stood behind his desk with his hands folded in front of him and the expression of a man delivering information he hasn't fully processed yet himself. "Mr. Vale has requested you specifically for his standing Thursday reservation," he said. She said nothing. "He's a weekly guest, takes the corner table in the main room, usually 3 to 4 covers. He asked for you by name." "By name? By name." She sat down in the chair across from his desk without being invited to. Marcus watched her do it and didn't comment. "I don't know why," she said. "He didn't give a reason. He doesn't typically explain his preferences." "Marcus," she looked at him, "do you know who he is?" "I know exactly who he is," he said, without inflection. "I also know that he's been a guest of this restaurant for 11 years and has never given us a single problem and has referred more covers to this room than any other single source in our history." He paused. "And I know that when Nikolai Vale makes a request, it's better for everyone if the request is honored." She understood what he was not saying. She understood it completely. "All right," she said. "Elara." He hesitated. "If there's any reason, if you're uncomfortable, if there's something I should know about—" "I'm fine," she said. She stood up. She went back to her section and picked up the check presenter from table 9 and did the math on the gratuity and entered it into the system and moved on to the next thing. Chad. Thursday arrived the way Thursdays always arrived, with the particular compressed quality of a day that knows something important is scheduled for later. She got to work at 4 for the dinner prep. She changed into her service uniform. She checked her section and confirmed her side work was done, and she was at the service station when the door opened at 7:15 and Nikolai Vale came in with 2 other men and was shown to the corner table. He sat with his back to the wall. Of course he did. She approached the table with the water pitcher and the bread basket and went through the opening service with the same composure she brought to every table. And when she asked for the drink order, she was looking at the table generally, at the space between the 3 of them, which was a technique for making each person feel individually attended to while not locking onto any one of them. "Water's fine," said the man on the left. "For the table. Still or sparkling?" "Still." She wrote it down. Elara. Her name, in that voice, with no surrounding context. Just her name, as if it were a door being knocked on. She looked at him directly. He was watching her with the same quality of attention he'd had in the alcove. Unhurried, undivided. The 2 men with him had both gone slightly still, and she registered this without understanding it. "How are you?" he asked. "Fine," she said. "Thank you." "Can I tell you about our specials this evening?" "Yes," he said. "Please." She told him about the specials. He listened the way some people listened, not waiting for the words to end so he could speak, but actually listening, his eyes on her face, tracking something beyond the content of what she was saying. It was not comfortable attention. It was not aggressive either. It was the attention of a man who had decided to see her, and she had spent 3 years making herself invisible to everyone in her life. And the friction of being seen was enormous. She finished the specials. "The lamb," he said. "Medium." "Of course." She took the remaining orders and went to the kitchen and stood at the pass for a moment with her order pad in her hand and made herself breathe. "This is a guest." She thought it very deliberately, the way you'd write something on the inside of your eyelids. "He is a guest. You serve him. You do your job. You go home." She went back out. The dinner service proceeded the way she managed it, smoothly, precisely, without incident. He ate the lamb. He ordered a glass of a Barolo she'd suggested without inflection and drank it slowly over the course of the meal. His two companions ate and talked between themselves in low voices that she registered as background and didn't attempt to parse. When she brought the check, he took it from her without looking at it and signed something and set it back on the table. She picked it up. "Elara," he said again. She stopped. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to understand before I ask it that you have no obligation to answer. I'm not asking as a customer. I'm asking as someone who has been in rooms like the one you're living in, a long time ago." He paused. "Are you safe at home?" The dining room was full. Table 10 was celebrating something. The bar was making noise with a late-arriving group. She stood at the corner table in the warm, golden light of belladonna and held a leather check presenter and looked at Nikolai Vale and felt the specific vertigo of a question she had not been asked before. Not quite like this. Not from someone who looked at her like they already knew the answer and were asking anyway because the answer needed to exist somewhere outside of her. "I'm fine," she said. He nodded. His expression didn't change. "Thursday is my standing reservation," he said. "I'm here every week." "I know," she said. "Good." She went back to the service station. She opened the check presenter. He had tipped 60% over the bill and written 2 words in the margin of the receipt in a tight, even hand. "I know." She didn't sleep that night. Trent had been in a reasonable mood. He'd won something, somewhere, the details of which she'd stopped tracking. And so the night had been quiet in the way she distrusted more than the loud nights, because the loud nights followed a known sequence, and the quiet nights could break any direction without warning. She lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling. "I know." She turned it over. She'd been turning it over for 2 hours. It could mean anything. It could mean nothing. He was a man accustomed to a particular kind of power over situations and people, and this could simply be the performance of insight, the strategic display of perception designed to create obligation, the way powerful people sometimes manufacture debt in others before ever making a formal demand. She knew this was possible. She also knew in the specific way that the body knows things it cannot articulate that it was not what was happening. She thought about the 2 words on the receipt, the handwriting, the evenness of it, the absence of anything theatrical. "I know." Not a threat, not a declaration, a simple acknowledgement of a fact, the kind of acknowledgement that carries the weight of whatever comes after it, but doesn't announce what that will be. She thought about what Marcus had said, that when Nikolai Vale made a request, it was better for everyone if it was honored. She thought about the man with the earpiece in the north alcove and the way he'd watched her afterward with the attention of someone who'd received instructions. She thought about Trent in the kitchen with his glass of water and his flat measuring gaze and his voice that went quiet before it went dangerous. She pressed her face into her pillow and held very still. She did not cry. She hadn't cried properly in a long time. The crying had been one of the first things to go, somewhere in the 2nd year, because it had become too expensive. The red eyes, the swollen face, the need to explain, the attention it drew in a household where attention was already too dangerous a currency. She lay still until the dark outside the window began to gray at the edges with early morning. Then she got up. Roman Cade had been working for Nikolai Vale for 11 years, which was long enough to know the difference between the things his employer noticed casually and the things he noticed with intent. This was intent. He understood it the moment he saw Nikolai's face in the alcove, the moment the sleeves slipped and the silence in the room changed in the way silence changed when Nikolai Vale made a decision. Roman had been in enough rooms at enough critical moments to recognize the sound of a course being set. After the luncheon, he'd gotten a name. Elara Holloway, née Voss, 31, server at Belladonna for 2 years and change. Before that, a coffee shop in Wicker Park for 8 months. Before that, brief employment at a marketing firm downtown that had ended without clear documentation. Before that, she'd been a graphic design student at DePaul, dropped out in her junior year. The husband, Trent Holloway, 41, freelance contractor of some kind. The work history was sparse and inconsistently documented. No criminal record, which told Roman nothing. The men who ran tight domestic operations were frequently the men who never showed up in official records. They knew where the lines were. They stayed just inside them. That was the whole architecture of it. Roman ran the full workup the way he'd been trained: digital trail, financial footprint, physical address, neighborhood pattern. He brought what he had to Nikolai on Wednesday evening, 12 pages in a manila envelope, and sat across from him in the study of the townhouse on Dearborn while Nikolai read through it without speaking. When he finished, he set it on the desk. "Her medical records?" he asked. "What I could access without triggering anything." Roman kept his voice level. 3 ER visits in 2 years. 1 documented as a fall. 1 as a kitchen accident. 1 she paid cash and signed in under a different name. The attending on the second one flagged it internally. Nobody followed up. Nikolai looked at the window for a moment. "Thursday," he said. "I want a permanent detail on her transit routes, bus stops, walking routes, anything she does on foot between home and the restaurant. Passive? For now." He looked at Roman. "She doesn't know. She doesn't see them. That's important." "Understood. What about the husband? What about him?" "Do you want me to—" "Not yet." His voice was flat. "Not yet." Roman nodded and collected the envelope and stood up. "Roman." He stopped. "Be careful with how it's done," Nikolai said. "She's been managed by someone for a long time. She reads control instinctively. If anything she encounters feels like control, she'll close down." He paused. "This has to come from her." Roman said nothing because there wasn't anything to say to that. He'd worked for Nikolai Vale for 11 years. He'd seen him make decisions about business, about competitors, about men who had crossed lines that didn't have good outcomes for the men who'd crossed them. He'd seen him cold, and he'd seen him precise, and he'd seen him in moments of anger that were brief and surgical and did not repeat themselves. He had never seen him like this. He wasn't sure what to do with that. He left the study with the envelope under his arm and went to make the calls. The Thursday after that, she arrived to find a small arrangement of wildflowers on the service station in her section. No card. Marcus, when she asked him, shrugged with the expression of a man who knew more than he was contributing. "Anonymous delivery," he said. "This morning." She left them where they were. She didn't mention them again. When Nikolai arrived that evening, she took his order and managed his table and brought his food and refilled his water, and he said nothing unusual, and she said nothing unusual, and at the end of the evening she collected the check, and it was the same as it always was now, generous, unremarkable, and inside the fold of the receipt a sentence in his tight, even handwriting. "You're being watched, not by me. Tell me if you need it to stop." She stood at the service station with the receipt in her hand and read it 3 times. Then she folded it and put it in her apron pocket and finished closing her section and walked out of Belladonna into the October night and stood on the sidewalk in the cold air and looked at the street. A town car was parked 20 yards down, engine idling. She walked to the bus stop and stood there. The town car didn't move. She took the bus north. When she got off at her stop, there was another car, or the same car, she couldn't tell, parked at the far end of the block. She walked the 4 blocks to her building and went upstairs and unlocked the apartment door. Trent wasn't home. She sat down at the kitchen table and put her hands flat on the surface and looked at them. Outside, in the street below, she heard a car engine idle briefly and then cut. She thought, this is what it would feel like if someone was actually paying attention. She thought, I don't know if that's better or worse. She thought, I don't know anything about this man except what the city says about him, and the city doesn't say kind things. She thought, he said it has to stop if I want it to. She thought about that for a long time. She did not go to the window. She did not look down at the street. She sat at the kitchen table and her hands were flat on the surface, and outside the city moved around her. Its particular noise, its particular cold, its particular refusal to stop for anyone. And she thought about a question she had not let herself ask in 3 years. What would it take to leave? Not the logistics. She'd run the logistics before, in the dark, in the bathroom, in the specific recursive loop of the impossible. Not the money or the documentation or the place to go, not the practical math of it. What would it take? The deeper thing. The thing that lived below the logistics, below the fear of his retaliation, which was real, below the exhaustion, which was real, below the accumulated weight of everything she'd normalized and accepted and built a functional life around. What would it actually take? She was still sitting there when she heard his key in the lock. She put her hands in her lap. She arranged her face. She became again the woman she'd learned to be. Unremarkable, composed, offering nothing that could be used. Trent came through the door and didn't look at her on his way to the kitchen, and she exhaled slowly through her nose and went to check what was in the refrigerator for tomorrow's breakfast because the refrigerator held half a block of cheddar, 2 eggs, a container of leftover rice that had been there since Tuesday, and a bottle of hot sauce with the cap crusted shut. Alara stood in front of the open door and looked at these things and felt the cold air on her face and heard Trent moving in the living room behind her. The particular sound of him, the weight of his footsteps, the way he dropped into the couch with a sound like something collapsing under its own load. And she calculated tomorrow's breakfast the way she calculated everything in this apartment, quietly, efficiently, without drawing attention to the process. She closed the refrigerator. "There's rice," she said without turning around. "Not hungry," Trent said. She nodded at the wall. She went to the bedroom and changed out of her work clothes and hung them over the back of the chair because the dry cleaning money had to last the week. And she got into bed and lay on her back and stared at the ceiling and listened to the television. Come on in the living room and the particular channel he defaulted to when he came home this kind of quiet. The sports recap channel. The one that ran the same half hour of highlights on a loop after midnight. She lay there for a long time. She thought about the receipt in her apron pocket, which she'd transferred to the inside pocket of her coat before she'd changed. She thought about the sentence written in that tight, even handwriting. She thought about the car idling at the end of the block. "You're being watched, not by me. Tell me if you need it to stop." The distinction mattered to him. She turned that over. He'd drawn the line explicitly. His surveillance, his people, but positioned outside his direct attention. As if the distance were a form of respect. As if he understood that the experience of being watched was itself a violation, and he was acknowledging that before she had a chance to feel it. She didn't know what to do with a man who thought that carefully about her experience. She fell asleep sometime after 2 and dreamed about nothing she could name. She found the car again Friday morning. She wasn't looking for it. She was walking to the bus stop with her collar up against the November cold, 3 minutes later than she'd meant to leave because Trent had been in the kitchen when she came out, and the process of moving through the kitchen with him there, making coffee without engaging, answering his flat questions with flat answers, getting her coat and bag without creating anything that could become a reason to stay, all of it had cost her 3 minutes she hadn't budgeted. She was halfway down the block when she registered the dark sedan parked on the south side of the street, engine running. She registered it the way she registered everything now, peripherally, without looking directly. She kept walking. At the bus stop, she stood with 4 other people and watched the street, and the sedan didn't move. When the bus came and she got on it and took a window seat, she looked back at the corner. The sedan pulled into traffic, stayed 2 blocks back. She faced forward. She thought, he said it has to stop if I want it to. She hadn't told him to stop. She wasn't sure what that meant about her. She wasn't sure she wanted to examine it closely enough to find out. Thursday arrived in its inevitable way, and she was in her section when Nikolai Vale came in at 7:20 with 1 man this time instead of 2. The compact one with the broad face and the still quality to him, the one she'd identified as the inner circle presence, the one who'd watched her in the north alcove. They sat at the corner table and she approached and did the service, and he ordered without looking at the menu, and when she came back with the water, she set it down and he said, quietly, without preamble, "You saw the car." It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said. "Does it bother you?" She thought about how to answer that. She had run the question several times over the last week, and she hadn't found a clean answer, which itself told her something. If it had purely bothered her, the answer would have been immediate. "I haven't decided," she said. He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, not softened exactly, but adjusted, as if she'd said something he hadn't expected and he was recalibrating. "Sit down," he said. "I'm working." "I know, 2 minutes." He glanced at the room briefly. "No one's looking." She didn't sit down. She stood at the edge of the table with her order pad and her professional composure, and she looked at him. "My husband knows something is different," she said. "He doesn't know what, but he's watching me more carefully." "I know." "You know because your people are watching him." "Yes." She absorbed this. "What do your people see?" He held her gaze. "Enough," he said. "That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It's not." He turned his water glass slowly on the tablecloth. He went to the restaurant Tuesday, spoke to your manager, asked what your Thursday schedule looked like. The floor did something complicated under her feet for a half second. She held still. Marcus didn't tell me that. Marcus doesn't want to worry you, or he doesn't want the complication. Probably both. She thought about Marcus, who was decent and careful and ran a clean operation and didn't want trouble. She thought about Trent standing in the small front vestibule of Belladonna talking to Marcus with his flat voice and his precise questions. She thought about the 3 days since Tuesday during which Marcus had said nothing to her. What did Marcus tell him? She asked. That your schedule varied week to week, that he couldn't share employee information. Nikolai paused. Your husband didn't push it. He knows where the lines are. He always knows where the lines are, she said, before she could stop herself. He looked at her. She looked back. Sit down, he said again. Quieter? She sat down. She told herself it was because it was a less visible position than standing at the side of the table. She told herself it was tactical. I need to ask you something directly, he said. And I need you to answer me directly, not the way you answer questions when you're managing someone. I don't. You do. You're very good at it. He said it without judgment. I need you to put that down for 2 minutes. She looked at him. He waited. All right, she said. Is there anywhere you can go? Family? A friend? Someone he doesn't know about or can't reach? She thought about her mother, who lived in Phoenix and had her own complications, and had called twice in the last year, and both times Alara had kept the calls short and neutral because Trent monitored the phone bill. She thought about Dana, the co-worker from the old job, who had gone quiet after Trent's call and whom she hadn't spoken to in 18 months. She thought about the architecture of a life systematically reduced to its minimum viable components. No, she said. He nodded, like he'd expected it. There are options, he said. I want you to know that, when you're ready for them. What kind of options? The kind that require you to make a decision first. He paused. I'm not going to make it for you. That's not what this is. She studied his face, the watchful quality, the specific patience of it, which wasn't the patience of someone waiting for something they wanted, but the patience of someone who understood that certain things couldn't be rushed without being broken. Why? She asked. Why what? Why does this concern you? Why any of this? She kept her voice flat, not hostile, just direct. You don't know me. I'm a woman who serves you food on Thursdays. You could have 100 servers at 100 restaurants. Why? She stopped. What's the actual interest here? He was quiet for a moment. I had a mother, he said, who spent 12 years in a situation that looked like yours, who died before she found a way out. He said it the way you'd state a fact about weather or geography, not without feeling, but with the feeling already integrated, already carried for so long that the words had lost their raw edges. That's not the whole answer, but it's the honest one. She sat with that. I'm sorry, she said. She meant it. Don't be. He picked up his water glass. Be practical instead. That's more useful. She almost laughed. She didn't. But something in her chest did a small, strange thing, some tension releasing fractionally in a place she hadn't known she was holding it. She stood up. She straightened her apron. She was a server at a restaurant, and she had a section to manage. I'll get your order in, she said. Alara. She looked at him. Think about the options, he said. That's all. Just think. Passase. She thought. She thought about it on the bus and in the apartment and in the bathroom in the mornings with the water running. And she thought about it during service when her hands were moving automatically and her mind had space to run. She thought about it with the focused, recursive intensity of someone who has been turning a locked door over in their mind for years and has suddenly found a different way to look at the door itself rather than just the lock. She had run the leaving math before. She knew its components. She knew what she'd need. Financial reserves, documentation, a place Trent couldn't find, a strategy for the period immediately after when his response would be at its most dangerous. She knew all of this. She'd known it for 2 years. The knowing hadn't been the problem. The problem was that she'd been running the math alone. She lay in bed on a Tuesday night and listened to Trent's breathing 3 feet away and thought about a man who had turned a water glass and said, be practical, and meant it as an act of care. She thought about what Roman Cade might have found in those 12 pages. She thought about the car at the end of the block, quiet, consistent, not demanding anything. She thought about calling. She had his number. He'd left it on the third Thursday, written under the tip line, no name, just 10 digits and the words, "When you're ready." She hadn't called. She wasn't ready. She was closer than she'd ever been, and she wasn't ready. And that specific position, closer than ever but still not there, was its own particular kind of suffering that she recognized from before. The stage where you could see the door but couldn't make your hand reach for it. Trent shifted in his sleep. She held still. The call came on a Thursday she wasn't working. She was in the laundromat 3 blocks from the apartment, sitting on the plastic bench with a book she wasn't reading, watching the clothes rotate in the drum and listening to the particular white noise of machines running, when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She stared at it. It buzzed again. She answered. "It's Roman Cade," said the voice. "Compact, direct, no performance. I work for Mr. Vale. He'd like me to pass something along if you're willing." She looked at the laundromat door, at the street outside. "Go ahead," she said. "We've identified some concerns about your husband's recent activity. Specifically, his conversations with 2 individuals in your building, your neighbor on the 2nd floor and the building supervisor. He's been asking about your comings and goings, specific timing, whether you've had visitors." She kept her breathing even. "When?" "This week. Monday and Wednesday." Monday, she'd been home all day. Wednesday, she'd met a former coworker for coffee. A harmless thing. A woman from the restaurant who'd recently moved to a different position downtown. They'd met at a place on Randolph and talked for 40 minutes, and she'd been back before 4. She hadn't told Trent because she hadn't thought she'd needed to. She was recalculating that assessment now. "He doesn't know about the coffee," she said. "Not yet." Roman's voice was careful. "We don't think he's confirmed anything, but he's building a pattern, looking for inconsistencies." She knew what that meant. She knew exactly what that meant in the specific language of a household like hers. When Trent started building patterns, it meant he was preparing a case, a justification. She'd seen it before. He'd spent 3 weeks gathering his evidence before the night of the wrist. "What does Mr. Vale recommend?" she said. The formality of it felt absurd and right at the same time. "He wants to offer you a meeting, tomorrow, somewhere outside your normal routes. He'll send a car. You decide if you want it." "If I get in a car, no one knows except the 3 of us," Roman said. "The driver is one of mine. It won't connect to the restaurant or to anything your husband could trace." A pause. "You have his number. If you want to tell him directly that you're not interested, you can do that." She watched the laundry rotate. "What time?" she said. The car arrived at the corner of Clark and Belden at 10 the next morning, which was the intersection she'd specified when she'd texted the address from a coffee shop Wi-Fi on a phone she'd borrowed from the barista by saying her battery was dead. She'd walked to the coffee shop from a different bus stop than she normally used. She'd told Trent she was going to the pharmacy for the migraine medication she did actually need. The car was not the dark sedan. It was a gray SUV with tinted windows and a driver who didn't introduce himself and didn't speak. She got in the back and the car moved, and she sat with her hands in her lap and watched the city pass outside the window. They drove for 20 minutes, north and then west, into a neighborhood she didn't know well. Tree-lined streets, older buildings, the quiet of a residential pocket that hadn't been discovered yet by the money moving through the city. The car stopped in front of a narrow building, 3 stories, unmarked. Roman Cade met her at the door. He was shorter than she'd registered in the restaurant, or maybe just differently sized outside of the context of a room built around someone else. He held the door and she went in. The interior was plain, a living space that functioned more like a waiting space, clean, functional, no personal objects, the kind of space maintained for use rather than habitation. There was a table and chairs in what would have been the dining room. Nikolai Vale was already seated. He stood when she came in, which she hadn't expected, and she filed it away in the part of her brain that tracked unexpected information. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I almost didn't," she said. "I know." He gestured to the chair across from his. "Coffee?" "No." She sat down. She put her bag on the table in front of her, which she recognized as a territorial gesture, a boundary-marking thing she did sometimes without planning to. She left it there. He sat back down. Roman positioned himself near the door in a way that was present but not hovering, and she'd begun to understand that this was his specific skill, being in a room without pressing into it. "I'm going to tell you what we know," Nikolai said, "and then I'm going to tell you what's available to you, and then you decide. All of it. No pressure, no obligation, no timeline except the one your situation creates." He looked at her directly. "Does that work? Tell me what you know," she said. He told her. It took 14 minutes. He was precise and ordered, and he didn't editorialize, and he didn't offer sympathy while he spoke, which she was grateful for because sympathy during the delivery of hard information had a particular quality of drowning that she couldn't manage right now. He laid it out the way you'd lay out a map. Here's the territory, here are its features, here is where you are. Trent's conversations with the neighbors, the pattern of questioning, a phone call he'd made Tuesday evening to an unknown number in a suburb she'd never heard him mention, a transaction on their joint account, which she'd stopped touching 2 years ago when she'd opened the separate account she kept at a different bank, small deposits from tip shares she reported as slightly lower than they were, that suggested he'd paid someone for something, the nature of which Roman was still working to identify, the separate account. Roman knew about it. He told her this without inflection, without judgment, and she registered it as information, not as exposure. "How?" she said. "Background financial trace. It's standard." He met her eyes. "It's yours. I'm not going to tell you what to do with it. I'm telling you I know about it, so we're not working from incomplete information." She absorbed this. "There's enough in it," Nikolai said, carefully, "combined with what we can provide, to cover the initial period. A lease. First and last. Basics. Long enough for you to stabilize." She looked at him. "What's the cost?" she said. "Nothing. That's not how things work. It is how this works." His voice was level, not defensive, not the over-insistence of someone covering a lie, just flat and direct. "I'm not buying anything from you, Alara. I'm not creating a debt. I'm offering a resource." He paused. "What you do after is yours." She sat with that for a long time, long enough that the sounds of the street outside, a truck passing, someone's car stereo briefly audible, came and went in the silence. "My husband called your restaurant," she said, "before any of this. He asked for me under my maiden name. Someone called the bar. I know, Roman found the number it came from. It was a cell phone registered to one of his acquaintances. He was testing to see if I'd told anyone about him. Yes? So he was already suspicious before any of this started. Before I was involved, yes." She looked at her hands. "That means whatever I do or don't do, the timeline is already running." "Yes." She nodded slowly. Something in her chest had gone very still, the way things went still right before they moved. "What would the process look like?" she said. "Specifically." Nikolai looked at Roman briefly. Roman came to the table and sat down and opened a folder she hadn't noticed him carrying and began to explain. She got home at 1:15. Trent was there. He was supposed to be at a meeting in Evanston. She'd noted it on the calendar on her phone, which he didn't know she checked regularly, but the meeting had apparently ended early, or not happened, or been something else entirely because he was in the kitchen when she came through the door, standing at the counter with his phone in his hand. He looked at her. "Pharmacy took a while," she said. "Where's the medication?" he said. She reached into her bag and her hand found the small CVS bag she'd stopped for on the walk back from the designated corner. The migraine medication, actual migraine medication, in an actual bag. She set it on the counter. He looked at it. He looked at her. "You look different," he said. "I'm tired," she said. "I have a headache." "You look—" He stopped. He tilted his head slightly, the way he did when he was running the calculation, when he was trying to identify the inconsistency he could smell but couldn't yet locate. "Where else did you go?" "Just the pharmacy." "Just the pharmacy," he repeated. The flat repetition of it, the specific cadence she knew. Not a question, a trap. A mirror held up to the statement so she could hear how it sounded. "Trent, you were gone 2.5 hours. The bus runs slow on Fridays. There was a wait." She kept her voice level. She was good at keeping her voice level. "I walked part of the way back." In this cold. I needed air. He set his phone down on the counter. He looked at her for a long moment with his flat, measuring gaze, and she held still under it the way you held still under the gaze of something you'd learned not to provoke with movement. I've been patient, he said. I know you have, she said, which was the required response, the one that acknowledged his narrative of himself as a patient man, which was the foundational lie of their marriage. But something's different with you. He took one step toward her, and I'm going to find out what it is. She held her ground. There's nothing different. Ilara. There's nothing. I went to the restaurant, he said. Last week. She said nothing. Your manager was polite. Didn't tell me anything useful. His voice had gone to its quiet register. But I noticed something. The way he looked at me. He paused, like he already knew who I was. The kitchen was 12 feet by 9 feet. She knew this. She knew exactly where she was in it. I don't know what that means, she said. It means someone's been talking about me. To people who work where you work. He took another step. And the only person who talks about me to anyone is you. I haven't. Stop. His voice cracked the air. Not loud. Never loud. Just sharp. The specific sharpness of it that cut through everything. Stop doing that. Stop saying you haven't when you have. I can see it on you. Something changed. Something's different, and you're standing there lying to my face, and I need you to understand that I already know. He stopped 1 foot from her. I already know something happened. She looked at him. Her heart was very loud in her own chest. Her hands were still. Nothing happened, she said. He reached out and took her arm. The same place, the same 2-finger grip along the bone, precise. Then why, he said very quietly, do you smell like a different building? She stopped breathing. He held her gaze. Tomorrow, he said, still quiet, still precise. I'm going to start making some calls, and I'm going to find out exactly what's been going on. He released her arm, stepped back, turned back to his phone on the counter. Make dinner, he said. She stood there for 3 seconds. Then she turned and went to the stove and opened the cabinet and took out a pan and set it on the burner with hands that were still and did not shake, and she thought with a clarity that felt like cold water running through the center of her. Tonight. It has to be tonight. She had Roman Cade's number. She had it memorized, not written anywhere, because written things could be found. She had the small amount of cash she kept in the lining of her winter coat. The coat Trent had never bothered to search because he didn't know she'd sewn the pocket there. She had her documents, passport, social security card, and a Ziploc bag inside a box of tampons under the bathroom sink because there were things even Trent's particular brand of control didn't reach. She turned the burner on. She heard him in the living room, his phone up, his voice low. She stood at the stove and looked at the cold pan and thought about 14 pages of documentation. She thought about a man who stood when she entered a room. She thought about a sentence written in a margin. I know. She thought about the door she'd been standing in front of for 3 years. Her hand was already reaching for her apron pocket before she registered that she'd decided, and the decision had the quality not of a choice made in the moment, but of a... The decision had the quality not of a choice made in the moment, but of something that had been made a long time ago and had simply been waiting for the right conditions to surface. Her hand found the phone in her apron pocket. She stood at the stove with the cold pan in front of her and the burner running and the sound of Trent's voice coming low and flat from the living room, and she typed the number from memory into a new message thread and wrote 4 words. I need to leave. She sent it. She put the phone back in her pocket. She opened the refrigerator and took out the eggs. Her hands did not shake. This was the thing she would remember later. Not the fear, not the decision, not the sound of her own heartbeat filling the kitchen, but the fact that her hands were completely steady while she cracked 2 eggs into the cold pan and watched them spread across the surface and waited. The phone buzzed 30 seconds later. She didn't take it out. Trent was still on his call, but his calls never lasted, and the geography of the kitchen meant that if he came through the doorway, she'd have maybe 4 seconds of warning. She waited. She heard his voice drop, and then stop. She heard the couch shift. She took the phone out. How soon? R. She typed back, tonight if possible. The response came in under a minute. Can you get to the Clark/Belden corner by 10? She looked at the clock on the microwave. It was 6:47. She put the phone back in her pocket and turned the eggs, and thought about 3 hours and 15 minutes, and what 3 hours and 15 minutes looked like when you were inside a 12-foot by 9-foot kitchen with a man who had just told you he was going to start making calls. Tonight, she thought. Just get through tonight. She made dinner, she set the table. She called Trent, and he came to the kitchen and sat down, and she put the plate in front of him and sat across from him, and they ate in the particular silence of their household. Not the comfortable silence of people who had run out of things to say to each other in a good way, but the operational silence of a shared space managed by unspoken protocol. He ate. He looked at his phone twice. He didn't look at her. She ate what she could, which was not much. Her stomach had gone to that specific tight state she associated with high-alert nights. Not nausea exactly, more like everything in her body redirecting its resources away from digestion and toward the specific problem of right now. After dinner, she cleared the plates. She washed them. She dried them. She put them away in the cabinet above the counter, and she moved through the kitchen with the practiced efficiency of someone whose entire domestic existence had been refined down to the minimum number of motions required to do what was necessary without producing anything that could be read as provocation. Trent went back to the living room. She heard the television come on. She went to the bathroom and closed the door and turned on the shower and stood in front of the mirror and looked at herself for a moment. Not the professional assessment of bruise coverage and presentation, but the simple act of looking, of seeing the face that had learned to become a surface. And then she moved. The Ziploc bag was where it always was. She took it out and put it inside the waistband of her jeans, flat against her skin. The cash in the coat lining, $240, accumulated over 8 months of understated tip reports. She left in the coat. She would need the coat, and the money would come with it. She turned the shower off. She came out of the bathroom. Trent was standing in the hallway. She stopped. He was looking at her with a different quality of attention than the kitchen. The kitchen had been the measuring look, the cataloging look. This was something more specific, something that had already completed its calculation and arrived at a conclusion. "Sit down," he said. "I was going to—" "Sit down." She went to the living room. She sat on the edge of the couch. He stood in the doorway between the hall and the living room with his arms crossed and his phone in one hand, and he looked at her for a long time before he spoke. "I made some calls," he said. She said nothing. "You want to know who I called?" She looked at him. She kept her face still. "I called Danny Rice," he said. "He works security at a building on DeKalb. Gray SUV, tinted windows. Freelance driver work on the side." He watched her face. "He recognized your description." The room tilted slightly. She held it together through pure mechanical effort, the specific muscle of composure she had built over years of exactly this, the performance of stillness in the face of catastrophic information. "I don't know who that is," she said. "No, but you were in his car today." He took a step into the room. "See, Danny doesn't work for many people. He's particular about his clients. Mostly does work for one operation." He paused. "You want to take a guess?" She said nothing. "Nikolai Vale," Trent said. The name came out of his mouth flat and cold, and with a weight behind it that was different from the usual weight of his words. This was not controlled anger. This was something that had moved past the architecture of control and into something rawer. "You've been seeing Nikolai Vale." "I serve him at the restaurant," she said. "He's a customer." "He's not a customer." Trent's voice cracked at the end of it, just slightly, the way ice cracks before it gives. "Don't insult my intelligence. Don't you dare stand there and tell me he's a customer." "I don't—" He moved. Not the careful, precise movement of the kitchen. This was different, faster, less calculated. And it was the difference in quality that scared her more than the speed. Because Trent's precision was always the thing she could navigate around. And this wasn't precise. This was... He grabbed her arm and pulled her to her feet, and his face was 6 inches from hers. "How long?" he said. "Trent, how long?" Nothing happened. She could hear her own voice very clearly. Steady, still steady. "He's a customer. I take his table on Thursdays, that's all." "Then why were you in his driver's car today?" His grip tightened. The same place, but less calculated than usual. More pressure, wider grip, the kind that would leave a clearer mark. "Why?" "I don't know what you're talking about." She knew it wasn't going to hold. She knew it wasn't going to hold, and she said it anyway because there was nothing else available. I went to the pharmacy. I walked. I don't know anyone named Danny. He released her arm and stepped back and put his hand through his hair and made a sound that wasn't quite a word and turned away from her. She watched his back. She watched the set of his shoulders. She watched the particular physical language of a man who was deciding which direction to take something. "Okay," he said. His voice had gone quiet again. That was worse. "Okay." He turned back around. "I'm going to tell you what's going to happen," he said. "You're going to call the restaurant tomorrow, and you're going to tell Marcus you're taking a leave. Indefinite. And you're going to stay home, and we're going to figure out what's been going on, and we're going to deal with it." He looked at her. "And if I find out you've had any contact with Nikolai Vale outside of that restaurant, I'm going to make sure he understands exactly what kind of liability he's created for himself." She understood the architecture of this threat immediately. He wasn't threatening her. He was threatening Nikolai. Because threatening Nikolai was the thing that would hold her in place. Not fear for herself, which he'd learned had diminishing returns, but fear for someone else's safety, which was a currency she'd never learned to discount. He knew her. She had to give him that. After 3 years, he knew exactly where to press. "You can't threaten," she started. "I'm not threatening anyone," he said. "I'm describing consequences. That's different." She stood in the living room of the apartment that was 12 feet by 9 feet in the kitchen and some larger configuration in the rest of it, but always smaller than it appeared from outside. And she looked at Trent Holloway, who knew where every single one of her load-bearing walls was. And she thought about the phone in her apron pocket in the kitchen. And she thought about 10 p.m. and Clark and Belden and Roman Cade's precise voice saying how soon. And she thought about 3 hours that had just become something else entirely. "All right," she said. He watched her. "All right," she said again. "I'll call Marcus tomorrow." He held her gaze for 5 more seconds. Then he nodded once, and the controlled quality came back into his posture like a tide returning, and he turned and went back toward the bedroom, and she stood in the living room alone. She waited until she heard the bedroom door close. Then she went to the kitchen and picked up her apron from the hook by the door and took the phone out of the pocket and typed, "Change of plans. He knows about the car. Don't come to the corner. I need another way." She waited. The response took 4 minutes. 4 minutes in which she stood in the kitchen in the dark with the phone in her hands and listened to the sounds of the apartment and calculated and recalculated. "Call me now." She turned on the sink full pressure and called. Roman answered on his first ring. "He knows about Danny Rice," she said very quietly, the water covering her voice. A brief silence. "How?" "I don't know. He said he made calls." "Danny Rice doesn't work for us directly. We used him twice, subcontracted. There's no direct line from him to Mr. Vale's." He stopped. Another silence, shorter this time. "Hold on." She held on. She stood at the sink with the water running and listened to the faint sound of Roman moving, a door closing somewhere, his voice low and rapid in what she couldn't make out. He came back on the line. "Ilara, I need you to listen carefully." "I'm listening." "Danny Rice made 3 calls tonight between 6 and 7, 2 to numbers we don't recognize, 1 to a number that traces to a man named Carl Myers. Myers does occasional work for your husband." The kitchen went very still around her. "Danny Rice works for my husband," she said. It wasn't a question. It had stopped being a question before she finished saying it. "We don't know the full picture yet, but it looks like Rice has been running both sides, hired to drive for us by a third party, who we now think was put in place specifically. He set it up," she said. The clarity of it was almost physical, like something cold and clear moving through her. "Trent set it up. He found out about the restaurant about Thursday. He didn't know enough yet, so he set up a way for me to think I had a way out, so he could follow where it led." Roman didn't answer immediately, which was its own answer. "The building on DeKalb," she said, "where Danny Rice works security. Trent Holloway has been using that building for meetings for 6 months, Roman said. "We knew about the building. We didn't connect Rice to it until tonight." She turned the water off. The silence in the kitchen was total. "So everything I told you today," she said, "the location, the timing, the corner. He likely has it." Roman's voice was careful, precise, not apologetic, There wasn't room for apology in the kind of conversation they were having. Yes. She put her hand flat on the counter. Everything she thought had been a door opening had been a room closing. The car, the meeting location, the address she'd given Roman, her decision, her fragile, decided thing, the hand finally reaching for the door. All of it had been moving inside a structure Trent had built around her before she'd even started moving. She thought about the folder Roman had opened at the table, the documentation, the plan, the resources. She thought about Nikolai saying all of it. You decide. She thought about how much she had believed over these last weeks that she had been making choices. He was going to let me try to leave, she said very quietly. And then he was going to stop me. And then he was going to... She stopped. She understood what the phone call to the unknown Evanston number had been, what the transaction on the joint account had been paying for. What I'm going to make some calls had meant. Trent hadn't been gathering evidence of infidelity. He'd been building a cage, the kind of cage you built not to trap someone in their current location, but to close off every direction they might run. I need to get out tonight, she said. Not the Clark and Belden corner, somewhere he hasn't heard. Mr. Vale is already being contacted. Give me 10 minutes. I don't have 10 minutes. She looked at the hallway. The bedroom door was still closed. He told me to call the restaurant tomorrow and take a leave. He thinks he's contained it. But if anything changes, if he checks my phone, if he hears me, go to the bathroom, Roman said. Lock the door. Leave the water running. I'll have a location to you in 5 minutes. She went to the bathroom. She locked the door. She left the water running. She sat on the edge of the tub and held the phone, and in the 4 minutes and 30 seconds that followed, she thought about the Ziploc bag against her stomach, and the cash in her coat in the closet, and the coat in the closet in the bedroom where Trent was currently behind a closed door, and the specific problem of retrieving it. The phone buzzed. An address, unfamiliar street. And below it, leave the coat. We'll cover whatever you need. Just walk out. R. She read it twice. Leave the coat. $240. 8 months of carefully understated tips, of careful math, of the specific accumulation of someone who has been preparing to survive. She had built that into the lining of that coat the way you'd build a foundation. Slowly, secretly, as the most real thing she owned. Leave the coat. She stared at the message. She thought about what Roman was telling her, which was not leave the coat, but you don't need it. You don't need the thing you've been building in secret because you were building it alone, and you're not alone anymore. She thought about whether she believed that. She thought about Danny Rice and the gray SUV and the room Trent had built around her without her seeing it. And she thought about whether she trusted Roman Cade's 10-digit number, and a man who stood when she entered a room enough to walk out of this apartment in November with no coat and no cash and $240 left in a coat she'd never see again. She turned off the water. She stood up. She unlocked the bathroom door. The hallway was empty. The bedroom door was still closed. From behind it, she could hear the faint sound of Trent's voice, low and intermittent. Another call, or the same one resumed. She stood in the hallway with her phone in her hand and her documents against her stomach and her coat on a hook in the bedroom, 3 feet from a man who had spent 6 months building an architecture of control around every exit she could imagine, and she thought, he planned for the woman I've been. She moved, not toward the bedroom door, toward the front door. She picked up her bag from the hook by the entry. Her regular bag, her work bag, the one she'd carried into the kitchen and not moved since she'd come home, the one with her phone charger and her work notepad and her wallet with the bank card for the account Roman already knew about. She picked it up. She put her hand on the front door. Behind her, the bedroom door opened. "Where are you going?" Trent's voice, flat and immediate, coming from directly behind her. She didn't turn around. Her hand was on the front door. Alara. Footsteps. 3, maybe 4. The particular weight of them on the old floor. "I asked you a question." She turned the knob. "Don't!" His voice had gone to the quiet register. The most dangerous register. "Don't you?" "Don't." She opened the door and walked through it and pulled it closed behind her, and she was in the hallway of the building. The damp carpet smell of it, the flickering overhead light that had been reported to the building supervisor 6 times in 2 years. And she walked to the stairs and went down them fast. Not running, because running announced panic. And panic announced a specific kind of vulnerability she couldn't afford in the stairwell. She heard the apartment door open above her. "Alara." his voice, in the stairwell, echoing off the painted cinder block walls. Not loud, never loud, but large in the enclosed space, filling it, following her down. You walk out of this building and I will... She hit the ground floor and went through the lobby door and out into the November street, and the cold hit her immediately, sharp and total, her arms bare under a thin long-sleeve shirt, and she turned left and walked fast. She heard the building door open behind her. She didn't look back. She pulled out her phone and texted the address Roman had sent and typed, "I'm out. Walking. He's behind me." She walked. The street was not empty. It never was, this time of night, in this neighborhood. And she moved through the people on the sidewalk with the specific controlled urgency of someone who could not afford to look like they were running, even though everything in her body was running, her heart running, her lungs running, her mind running through the geometry of the streets ahead and the distance to the address and the sound of footsteps behind her that she could not quite hear over the ambient noise of the city, but also could not quite convince herself she couldn't hear. Her phone buzzed. "Car is 4 minutes from your location. Keep walking north. Don't stop." She walked north. The cold was significant. The kind of cold that made itself known immediately in the absence of proper clothing. Not dangerous yet, but communicating its intention. She kept her arms close to her body and her pace even, and she watched the street ahead and the intersection coming up and the headlights of the cars moving through it. Her phone buzzed again. Black sedan. License plate IL. And a number she memorized immediately, looking at it once and locking it in the way she locked in things she needed. She reached the intersection. She looked left and right. She saw the sedan half a block down, moving toward her, and she stepped to the curb, and it pulled up and the window came down, and the driver was a woman, mid-40s, dark hair, the particular expression of someone executing a task with full professionalism and zero drama. "Get in," the woman said. Alara got in. The car moved. She sat in the back seat in her thin shirt in the November cold and watched her building disappear behind her in the side mirror, and she sat with what she'd done. The weight of it, the specific gravity of a thing that could not be undone. And she thought about Trent standing on the sidewalk watching the car go, or not standing on the sidewalk, or making a call, or doing the thing he'd promised he would do if she tried to leave. The thing she had not let herself fully imagine, because the imagining of it was its own kind of paralysis. The driver didn't speak. Alara looked out the window at the city moving past. Its lights, its noise, its complete indifference to the specific catastrophe of any individual life unfolding inside it. And she breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way she'd learned in the bathroom with the shower running. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She looked at it. She thought about not answering. She answered. "Alara." Nikolai Vela's voice. Not Roman's. His. Steady, unhurried, the particular quality of a man who had decided how a situation was going to go before he picked up the phone. "You're in the car." "Yes." "Good." A pause. Where he goes from here, how he responds, is going to determine the next 24 hours. I need you to understand that we don't know yet which direction he takes this. "What directions are there?" she said. "He accepts it. Unlikely." A brief pause. "He escalates." She looked at the window. The city. "He has something," she said. "Something he was going to use. The calls, the account. He was building toward something." "I know what he was building toward." Nikolai's voice hadn't changed in quality, but something in it had tightened fractionally, the way a rope tightens. "That's what I need to talk to you about." Another pause. "When you get here." "What is it?" "When you get here," he said again. She looked at the phone. She looked at the city outside the window. She thought about the gray SUV and Danny Rice and the room that had been built around her, and she thought about whether the room she was moving toward now was different in kind or only in construction. She thought about a man who stood when she entered. "All right," she said. She lowered the phone. Outside, Chicago moved past in the dark, its skyline cutting the low clouds, its streets full of the particular human traffic of a Friday night, its thousands of lit windows, each containing the specific private world of someone else's life, in some state of order or disorder, or the particular suspended condition that existed between the two. The sedan moved through it smoothly. unhurried. In the front seat, the driver kept both hands on the wheel and her eyes on the road and said nothing. And Alara sat in the back in her thin shirt with her arms pulled close against the cold that the car's heater was beginning to address. And she held her phone and felt the specific weight of a woman who had just stepped off the edge of the life she knew and had not yet seen where the ground was. And behind her, somewhere in the city she was leaving, Trent Holloway was already making the call before the sedan's taillights disappeared around the corner. She didn't see this. She was in the car, moving north through the city's Friday night traffic, the heater running, her arms slowly thawing. But Roman's people were still on the block. They'd been on the block since Wednesday, rotating positions, 2-hour intervals, and the man parked in the white Honda at the end of the street watched Trent come out of the building with his phone up, and his face doing something that wasn't anger exactly, or wasn't only anger, and relayed what he saw in a text to Roman in under 40 seconds. Roman read it in the front room of the safe house on the northwest side where Alara was being taken, and he went to find Nikolai. Nikolai was standing at the window looking at the street below with his hands in his pockets and his jacket off, the white shirt open at the collar, and when Roman came in, he didn't turn around, which meant he already knew or had already guessed. "He's on the phone," Roman said. "Who does he call first?" Nikolai said. It wasn't a question. Myers, then probably Rourke. Roman came to stand near the window, not beside him, at a slight angle, the way he'd learned to position himself in rooms where decisions were being made. Rourke has 3 people freelancing right now. 2 of them have done collection work. He's going to try to bring her back, or make it complicated enough that she comes back to avoid what he does to people she's connected to. Roman paused. "He went to Belladonna twice, boss. He knows what Marcus looks like. He knows the layout." Nikolai turned from the window. His face was composed in the particular way it got composed when he'd moved past the deliberation stage and into the implementation stage. Not cold exactly, more like everything non-essential had been set aside. A room cleared of furniture so you could see the dimensions clearly. "Marcus needs to know tonight," he said. "Already sent someone." "And Alara arrives in 12 minutes. Nikolai nodded once. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair and put it on. "Tell me about the thing he was building. All of it." Roman sat down and told him all of it. The safe house was not what she'd expected, though she hadn't known what she'd expected. It was a narrow 3-flat on a residential street, the kind of building that had been renovated once, adequately, and then left alone. The driver pulled into the alley behind it, and they went in through a back door into a kitchen that smelled of coffee and was lit by overhead fluorescence, and felt inhabited in a functional rather than personal way. The kitchen of a place people passed through rather than lived in. Roman was there. A woman she didn't know, mid-30s, dark coat, who handed her a gray sweatshirt without comment, and then left the room. Alara put the sweatshirt on and felt the cold begin to lose its grip on her arms. "He's made contact with 2 people, Roman said, setting a mug of coffee on the table in front of her. "We're monitoring." "How?" she said. "We have access to his call logs through a secondary route. It's not admissible anywhere. It's useful." She sat down. She wrapped her hands around the mug. "What people?" "Carl Myers, who we know, and a man named Patrick Rourke, who runs a small operation out of Bridgeport. Does enforcement work." Roman kept his voice level, factual, the same way Nikolai had been level and factual in the North Alcove meeting, and she recognized this as a house style, the deliberate withholding of emotional register so that she could hold on to her own. "Rourke has done work adjacent to your husband before. 2 years ago, there was an incident involving a business associate of Trent's who tried to exit a shared arrangement. Rourke facilitated the resolution. What does that mean?" she said. "It means the man who tried to exit didn't exit." Roman paused. "He's still in Chicago. He's currently employed in a position that is substantially worse than the one he tried to leave, and he doesn't make independent decisions anymore." She held the mug. "Trent's going to try to use Rourke to create pressure," Roman said. "Not direct confrontation. Not yet. He'll want to demonstrate that your position outside his household is more dangerous than your position in Spirmat. By going after people I'm connected to." Yes, she thought about Marcus. She thought about the coworker she'd had coffee with on Wednesday, the woman from the restaurant whose name was Jess and who had 2 kids and a dog and a life that had nothing to do with any of this. She thought about her mother in Phoenix, who she'd kept at arm's length for a year and a half. "Where's Mr. Vale?" she said. "He'll be here in a few minutes. He wanted to give you time to—" "I don't need time," she said. "I need to know what happens next." Roman looked at her. Something in his expression adjusted. Not surprise exactly, but a recalibration. "All right," he said. He sat down across from her and told her. Ashab. Nikolai arrived at 9:47. He came through the back door and into the kitchen, and she was still at the table, and he looked at her. The full direct look, not the careful managed thing, just the actual look, and said, "You're all right." "I'm fine," she said. "You don't have to say that here." She looked at him. "I'm cold and I'm scared, and I think my husband just hired someone to make my life impossible, and I need to know what you're going to do about it." She kept her voice even. "That's where I am." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He didn't look at Roman. "What did he tell you?" "About Rourke, about the pressure strategy." "Then you know the short version." He folded his hands on the table. "The longer version is that Trent has been preparing this contingency for longer than we realized. The account transaction we identified, it wasn't for Rourke. It was for documentation." She frowned. "What kind of documentation?" "The kind that, in the wrong hands, creates a problem for me specifically." He held her gaze. "He found something, we don't know yet how, related to a transaction I made 14 months ago. It's not clean. It's the kind of thing that doesn't end in prosecution, but ends in significant disruption if it surfaces in the right way to the right people." The kitchen was very quiet. "He's going to use it," she said. "He's going to try to use it as leverage, not to get you back specifically, to get me to step away, to make continuing to be involved in your situation more costly than walking away from it." He paused. "It's a reasonable strategy. It might have worked on a different version of this situation." "Does it work on this one?" she said. He looked at her for a moment. "No?" she breathed. "What does not working look like?" "It looks like tonight," he said. "It looks like the next few hours." He laid it out for her, precisely in the same way Roman had laid things out. The map of the territory, the features of it, where she was standing in it. He told her that Rourke's people had been seen in the neighborhood around Belladonna at 8:30, which was 30 minutes before she'd left the apartment. He told her that Marcus had been reached and had closed the restaurant early and was currently at a location Trent didn't know about. He told her that the documentation Trent held had been identified through a chain she didn't need to understand, and that his people were working to neutralize it through channels that were faster than Trent anticipated. He told her that Trent, having lost the direct option of retrieval and having found the leverage option blocked faster than he'd planned for, was going to run out of moves quickly. "When someone runs out of moves," she said carefully, "and they're the kind of person he is—" "They stop being strategic," Nikolai said. "Yes." The word landed in the kitchen and stayed there. "He's going to come at you directly," she said. "Probably. Tonight." "Likely." She put the mug down. Her hands were steady. She noted this. "And you're going to let him." He held her gaze. "I'm going to be where he comes." "That's not the same thing as letting him." "No," he said. "It's not." She looked at him, at the watchful face, the composed set of his shoulders, the quality of stillness in him that she'd been trying to read for weeks and had finally started to understand was not the stillness of a man who didn't feel things, but the stillness of a man who had made a permanent private decision about what he did with what he felt. "Why?" she said. He didn't answer immediately. "Because I'm tired of watching it happen to people," he said finally. Quiet. No performance in it. "And because you walked out of that building tonight, and that matters." He paused. "It matters to me." The kitchen held that. She didn't know what to say to it, so she said nothing, and he didn't seem to need her to say anything. And after a moment he stood up and looked at Roman, and something passed between them in the nonverbal language they'd developed over 11 years. "Stay here," he said to her. "Don't open the back door for anyone except the woman who gave you the sweatshirt. Her name is Petra." "Where are you going?" "To finish this." "Nikolai." His name in her mouth for the first time. It stopped him. He turned. She looked at him. "Don't kill him," she said. Not a request, not quite a plea. Something in between, said with the directness she'd learned from watching him be direct. "Whatever he's done, Don't. He held her gaze for a long moment. All right, he said. He left. Roman left behind him. The kitchen was empty except for her and the fluorescent hum of the light above and the coffee going cold in the mug. She sat there. She lasted 6 minutes. The warehouse was Nikolai's choice, not Trent's. Trent had been moving toward Belladonna. His people had confirmed this at 10:15. Rourke's 2 men walking the block around the restaurant with the specific casual purpose of men doing reconnaissance, when Roman's people had made contact with Rourke directly. Not threatening. Informational. Rourke was a businessman, and Nikolai Vale was the kind of business reality that made other business realities recalculate very quickly. And the message Roman delivered was simple. Your client has been redirected. The address is yours if you want to pass it along. Rourke passed it along. Whether he understood what he was doing when he passed it along was not something anyone spent time analyzing afterward. The warehouse sat on the industrial edge of the near west side, a neighborhood that was half converted and half abandoned. Old manufacturing buildings that had been waiting 15 years for the development money to reach them. This one was 3 stories of reinforced concrete and rusted steel, the loading dock on the south face, 2 vehicle entrances. The interior a vast open space cut through with the shadows of old equipment and the sound of rain beginning on the metal roof. Nikolai arrived first. He came with Roman and 2 other men, not a show of force, a practical minimum, and they moved through the building's interior with flashlights and established the space with the efficiency of people who had done this kind of preparation before. The flood lamps were Roman's provision, 4 of them on portable stands positioned to illuminate the center of the space while leaving the perimeter in shadow. Not theatrical, functional. Nikolai wanted to see the man's face. Trent arrived at 11:08. He came with Rourke's 2 men and one of his own, a large man Nikolai's people identified as someone who'd done time in Stateville and had been working for Trent informally for about 8 months. 4 people total, which told Nikolai that Trent had been moving fast and hadn't had time to call in the full depth of whatever resources he believed he had. Trent walked into the flood lamp light and stopped. He looked around the space. He looked at the 4 men arrayed behind Nikolai at the edges of the light. He looked at Nikolai. He was still in the clothes from the apartment. Dark jeans, a jacket, no tie, the collar of a gray shirt. He looked like a man who had left his house quickly, which he had. His face was doing the thing it did. The measuring look, the calculation running. But underneath it, something else was visible tonight, something that Trent Holloway's face almost never allowed, which was the raw signal of a man who understood, on some animal level, that he had miscalculated the magnitude of what he was walking into. He recovered. You had to give him that. The recovery took about 3 seconds, which was fast for the amount of recalibration required. Vale, he said. Trent. Nikolai's voice was level. He stood at the edge of the light with his hands at his sides, and nothing in his posture was aggressive, which was the thing that would have frightened anyone who understood what that meant. You've been involving yourself in my marriage, Trent said. His voice was the controlled voice, the quiet register. Old habit. Your marriage is over, Nikolai said. We can talk about what comes after, or we can waste time on the part that's already finished. Something moved across Trent's face. She's my wife. She was. You don't get to... The documentation, Nikolai said. You want to use it, I understand. It's a reasonable play. He paused. It won't work. By tomorrow morning, the people you were planning to surface it with will have received other information that makes your version of the story significantly less useful to them. That door is already closing. He held Trent's gaze. You know this. You made the call to Myers 40 minutes ago, and Myers told you the same thing I'm telling you now, which is why you're here with 4 people instead of a lawyer. The rain on the roof had intensified. It came in sheets against the high windows, the sound of it filling the space above them. Trent's jaw tightened. It was a small movement. Alara would have recognized it. You think you've covered everything. I think you're a man who has controlled one woman for 3 years and has confused that with being dangerous, Nikolai said. You're not dangerous, Trent. You're mean. Those are different things. The large man from Stateville moved. He moved fast, faster than Trent's instruction, or without it, just the muscular instinct of a man paid to respond to certain signals. And he covered 6 feet before Roman stepped out of the shadow to his left, and the movement stopped in a way that was immediate and total, and the man stood very still with Roman's hand on his arm and Roman's eyes on him, and the specific quality of Roman's stillness communicating a complete and specific message that required no translation. The two Rourke men looked at each other. Trent looked at Nikolai. "Call them off," Nikolai said. "All three." The silence stretched for 4 seconds. 5. Trent made a small gesture with his right hand. The large man stepped back. The Rourke men stepped back. Roman released the arm and returned to the edge of the light. "Good," Nikolai said. Trent breathed. His chest moved with it. The first visible break in the performance of control, the physical acknowledgement of the situation he was standing in. He was still running the calculation. She would have known this. The calculation never stopped for him. But the variables had changed and were changing, and the results kept coming back wrong. "What do you want?" he said. "I want you to hear what I'm offering," Nikolai said. "Once. Clearly. So there's no confusion later about what you understood and when you understood it." Trent waited. "You leave Chicago," Nikolai said. "Not tonight. Inside 72 hours. You sign whatever Alara's lawyer puts in front of you. The divorce, the terms, everything. You do not contest. You do not communicate with her workplace, with anyone connected to her. You do not return to this city." He paused. "In exchange, I don't do what I'm capable of doing to a man who has spent 3 years breaking someone I consider to be under my protection." The rain, the flood lamps, the vast space of this warehouse with its old equipment shadows and its rusted roof. Trent's face had done something complicated during this speech. The calculation running, the variables shifting, the specific moment when a man realizes that the room he's standing in is not the room he thought he was walking into. He was angry. She would have known the precise frequency of it, the particular quality of his anger going cold and hard rather than hot. But the anger was hitting something larger than itself and dispersing. "You can't make me leave my own city," he said. "I'm not making you do anything," Nikolai said. "I'm telling you the cost of not choosing to." "What cost?" "Every arrangement you have. Every informal business relationship. Every handshake deal that depends on other people choosing not to look too closely at your history." Nikolai's voice was still level, still unhurried. "I have 11 years of relationships in this city. Your 3 years of accumulated leverage is a week's work to me." He paused. "I don't want to spend the week, so I'm offering you the alternative." Trent stared at him, the calculation running. "She's not worth this," Trent said. The word she had a specific quality when he said it, not contempt exactly, something more particular, the sound of a man who had spent years reducing someone to a single manageable category and was now confronted with evidence that the reduction had been incorrect. "That's where you're wrong," Nikolai said. The silence was long. Trent looked around the space, at Roman, at the men at the edges of the light, at the rain-streaked windows above, and the looking had a quality she would have recognized as the final assessment, the moment when he computed the available exits and found them limited. 72 hours, Trent said. 72 hours. And the documentation? Neutralized. On my end. What you do with your copies is your business, but they'll be useless. Nikolai held his gaze. Trent, I want to be clear about one thing before you decide. Trent waited. If you take this, Nikolai said, it's finished. You leave, and it's finished, and you never exist in her life again. That's the deal. His voice didn't change in volume or register, but something in it sharpened, the way a clean edge is sharp. Not jagged, just definitive. If you don't take it, I'm going to dismantle everything you've built piece by piece until there's nothing left that you recognize as yours. And I'm not going to rush it. I'm going to take my time. A pause. Decide. The warehouse breathed around them. The rain came down. Trent Holloway stood in the flood lamplight with 3 men behind him and 4 men at the edges of the shadows, and the full weight of everything he'd spent 3 years constructing. The control, the architecture, the careful management of another person's existence, pressing down on him from every direction, and the face that had learned to perform restraint went through something that was not performance. Something that was the actual experience of a man who had built his entire identity on the premise that he was the most dangerous thing in any room he entered and had just discovered that he was not. He turned. He walked toward the loading dock entrance without speaking. His 3 men followed. The door opened. The cold November air came in with a rush of rain smell and city sound. The door closed. The warehouse was quiet except for the rain. Roman exhaled through his nose. One of the men at the edge of the light shifted weight. Nikolai stood still in the floodlamp glow for a moment, looking at the closed door. His face was unreadable. Then he turned and looked at Roman and said, "The lawyer, first thing tomorrow." "Already scheduled," Roman said. Nikolai nodded. He picked up his jacket from where he'd set it on a crate at the edge of the light. He walked toward the vehicle entrance. He stopped. He stood there with his back to the room and his hand on the door frame, and he said, quietly, to the empty space in front of him, "To no particular person." "She asked me not to." Roman said nothing. "I remember that," Nikolai said. He pushed the door open and walked out into the rain. She was still in the kitchen when she heard the back door. Petra had come through once, around 11, to tell her that things were proceeding and to offer more coffee. And she'd taken the coffee and sat with it and not drunk it and thought about things she had no information to think about clearly yet, which was its own specific kind of suffering. The waiting room suffering, the suspended in uncertainty suffering that she'd spent 3 years in the middle of and had perhaps naively assumed she was close to being done with. The back door. She stood up. Nikolai came through it. His jacket was damp at the shoulders from the rain. His face was composed. He looked at her, and she looked at him. And she read his face the way she'd been learning to read it over these weeks, past the watchfulness, past the performance of nothing, into the actual information underneath. "He's gone," he said. She breathed. "He's not, no. He's gone." He said it simply. "He'll sign the papers. He'll leave." A pause. "It's done." She sat back down. The chair caught her. Her hands were on the table and they were shaking now, finally shaking, the steadiness exhausted, the body reclaiming what it had been owed for hours. And she looked at her shaking hands and felt a specific shame about them, and then felt the shame dissolve because she was sitting in a kitchen in a sweatshirt in November, having just walked out of the life that had been making her shake for 3 years, and the shaking seemed proportionate. He sat down across from her. He didn't touch her hands. He didn't speak. He sat there, close enough, present enough, and let the shaking happen without making it into something that required her management. She looked up at him. "He's going to be angry," she said, "when the deal feels real. When he's somewhere else and the anger has nowhere productive to go. He's going to be angry somewhere else," Nikolai said. "That's what I need you to hear. Somewhere else." She looked at him. Something in the kitchen had shifted. The quality of the air, or the quality of being two people in a room together without the weight of everything pending pressing down from every surface. Just the rain outside. Just the fluorescent hum. Just this. "I said your name," she said, "when you were leaving." "I know," he said. "I didn't plan to." "I know that too." She held his gaze, the watching face, the patience that wasn't waiting for anything, but was just there, just present, the way something solid was present. "What happens now?" she said. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers, not gripping, not holding, just covering the shaking with the warmth of another hand, the simple physical fact of it, and the shaking slowed, and she felt it slow, and she looked down at their hands on the table. "Tonight you sleep here," he said. "Tomorrow the lawyer calls. The day after that we start the next thing." He paused. "One thing at a time." She looked at the hands, his, hers. The shaking almost stopped now. "He said something," she said quietly. "Trent. Tonight in the apartment before I left. He said something about how she wasn't worth this." She swallowed. "About me?" Nikolai's hand didn't move. "He was wrong," Nikolai said. The simplest 3 words. Said with no escalation, no performance, no accompanying architecture of persuasion. Just the fact. She looked up at him. He was looking at her the same way he'd looked at her in the north alcove of Belladonna the first day. The look that went through the surface and didn't look away from what was underneath. And the thing she felt in her chest was enormous, and she didn't have a name for it, and she didn't need one yet. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Before tomorrow. Before the lawyer and the papers and everything that comes after." She waited. He looked at her hands, then at her face. Then, with the particular quality of a man who has decided to say a true thing regardless of what it costs. I have loved you since the day you stood in that room and answered my question with your whole face while your voice said something different. He said it quietly. Not a declaration. A fact, delivered in the same register as all his other facts. I don't expect you to have an answer to that. I know what you've been through, and I know what you're walking into, and I know this is the worst possible time for... Nikolai, she said. He stopped. She looked at him. She had not looked at anyone like this in a very long time. The looking felt enormous and frightening, and also, underneath all of that, the most honest thing she had done in years. I know, she said. Quiet. Direct. The voice she used when she was done managing and was just saying the true thing. I know. I've known for weeks. I just didn't know what to do with it. The kitchen was very still. Outside, the rain came down on the city. On the warehouse on the near west side, where 4 flood lamps were being switched off and loaded back into a van. On the street in front of the apartment building in Rogers Park, where a man named Trent Holloway was throwing clothes into a bag with the specific mechanical fury of a man whose architecture had collapsed. On the residential street in the northwest, where a woman named Petra was locking the front door. On Michigan Avenue, where Belladonna sat dark and closed and waiting for morning. In the kitchen, Nikolai Vale looked at Alara Voss and she looked back at him, and neither of them spoke. Because the thing that needed to be said had been said, and what came next was not words, and the rain kept falling until almost 4 in the morning, and then it stopped. Alara knew this because she didn't sleep. She lay in the small room at the back of the safe house, a plain room, a bed with clean linens, a window that looked out onto the alley, and she listened to the rain on the glass and felt her body doing its slow inventory of everything it had been carrying, and was only now, in the particular silence of a house where nothing was required of her, beginning to set down. Her arm ached where Trent had grabbed her in the kitchen. Her feet ached from the cold sidewalk. Behind her eyes, there was a pressure that was not quite a headache and not quite tears. Something in between, something that didn't have a clean name. She lay still and let the inventory happen. At some point, the rain stopped. The silence it left behind was different from the silence during, heavier, more settled, the silence of something concluded. She turned onto her side and looked at the window and the alley below, where a streetlight made a small orange circle on the wet concrete and nothing moved through it. She thought about Trent, not the kitchen, not the warehouse, not the specific moment of the grab or the calculation in his eyes. She thought about earlier than that. She thought about the first year when she'd still believed that the good weeks were the real thing and the bad weeks were the aberration, when she'd still maintained the architecture of a marriage in her own mind, even as the actual structure was being systematically dismantled. She thought about the woman she'd been then, not naive. She'd never been naive, but willing. Willing to believe that the version of a person they showed you in their best hours was the true version, and the worst hours were the distortion. She thought, I spent 2 years grieving a marriage that never existed. She thought, I spent 1 more year grieving the idea that I couldn't survive without it. And then she stopped thinking and lay in the clean dark and breathed and let the stopped rain and the orange light on the wet concrete be enough. She slept just before 5. The lawyer's name was Diane Chu, and she arrived at 10 the next morning with a leather briefcase and the particular energy of a woman who had been doing this work for 20 years and had long since stopped being surprised by the specific configurations of damage people did to each other. She sat across from Ilara at the kitchen table. The same fluorescent light, the same mug of coffee that Petra kept refilling without being asked. And she went through the documents with the methodical precision of someone who understood that the most important thing she could offer right now was clarity. The divorce filing will go in Monday morning, she said. Given the evidence package we have, the medical records, the documented financial control, the witness statements from 2 current Belladonna staff members, I don't anticipate a contested proceeding. He said he'd sign, Alara said. He said that last night under specific conditions. Diane looked at her directly. I want you to be prepared for the possibility that in the light of morning, with the specific conditions less immediate, he reconsiders his options. He won't, said Roman from the doorway. He came in and set a folder on the table. He left his apartment at 6:47 this morning with 2 bags. His car is currently on I-90 westbound. He looked at Alara. He made 1 call before he left. to a number in Denver. She absorbed this. Does he have connections in Denver? His brother lives there. They're not close, but it's somewhere to be. Roman paused. He's running the math the same way you ran it for 3 years. He knows what he has and what he doesn't. He glanced at Diane. He'll sign. Diane looked at the folder, then at Alara. The restraining order goes in simultaneously with the divorce filing. Any contact attempt, phone, mail, in person, through a third party, triggers immediate consequences. She paused. I want to be clear about something. This protection is real. It has teeth. I have worked with Mr. Vale's office before, and when he commits resources to a legal strategy, those resources are thorough. Alara looked at her hands on the table. The steadiness was back. It had been back since she woke up. The shaking in the kitchen last night felt like something that had happened to a slightly earlier version of herself, a version that had still been running on the accumulated exhaustion of everything prior. This morning she felt something different. Not relief exactly. Relief implied that the danger had been external, and she was beginning to understand that some of the danger had been internal, had been the architecture of diminishment she'd built around herself in order to survive. And that architecture didn't come down overnight just because the external threat had driven away on I-90. But different, she felt genuinely, simply different. What do I need to do today? She said. Diane told her. She went back to her apartment that afternoon with Petra and one of Roman's men. She had 90 minutes and 2 bags, which was what they'd agreed on. Not because of any external constraint, but because Alara had made the decision herself on the drive over, sitting in the back of the car watching her neighborhood approach, that she did not want to spend more time than necessary inside those walls. She wanted what she needed and nothing else, and she wanted to be out before she talked herself into needing more than she could carry. The apartment smelled the same. Of course it did. Damp carpet from the building, the particular smell of Trent's brand of instant coffee that he made every morning and that she had made for him for 3 years without drinking it herself, the faint trace of whatever cleaning product the building manager used on the hallway floors. All of it completely ordinary. All of it laced with the specific neurological charge of 3 years of conditioning that her body had not yet received the memo about. She stood in the entry for a moment. Petra waited by the door. The other man waited in the hallway. She walked through the apartment. She went to the bedroom and packed 2 bags with the focused efficiency she'd been practicing for 2 years in her head. The contingency packing, the mental list of what actually mattered, the discipline of not adding things that were heavy with sentiment but light on practicality. Documents, clothing, the small wooden box from the top shelf of the closet where she kept 3 photographs, her parents at their wedding, her college graduation, a summer afternoon from before. She went to the bathroom and took her things from the cabinet below the sink. She did not go to the kitchen. She carried the 2 bags to the entry and Petra picked up the heavier one without being asked. And they went down the stairs and out of the building and into the afternoon light on the street. And Alara stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the building's facade for a moment. The water staining on the brick, the window on the 3rd floor that was their window, and she looked at it and let it be what it was, which was a building she had lived in and would not live in again, and then she turned and got in the car. She didn't look back. Trent Holloway signed the divorce papers on a Tuesday, 17 days after the night in the warehouse. Diane called Alara at 2:14 in the afternoon and told her in the precise, unembellished way that Alara had come to appreciate about her. His attorney filed this morning. The terms are as agreed. No contest on any provision. A pause. It'll be finalized in 60 days standard processing. Alara was sitting in a coffee shop on the north side, a different coffee shop from the one she'd borrowed the phone from, a better one, with good light through the front windows and the kind of noise level that made solitude feel inhabited rather than empty. She was working on a graphic design project, the first one she'd taken in over 2 years, a small branding job for a restaurant opening in Wicker Park, found through a former DePaul classmate who'd tracked her down through a professional network she'd let go quiet and was slowly reactivating. She looked at the laptop screen. "Thank you, Diane," she said. 60 days, Diane said. Then it's done. She put the phone down on the table. She looked out the window at the street. November had become December while she wasn't paying attention, and the city had put on its winter architecture, so the coats, the scarves, the particular way people moved through cold air with their shoulders drawn up and their faces pointed forward. She watched them move past the window and she thought about 60 days and what 60 days meant and what done meant when you were talking about the conclusion of something that had taken 3 years to build and had cost things that 60 days could not return. She picked up her coffee. She went back to work. Marcus called the following week. "I want you back," he said without preamble, which was his style. "Full section. Your schedule, within reason. No questions about what happened." She was in the small apartment she'd taken in Lincoln Square. A one-bedroom on the second floor of a graystone, the kind of place that was affordable and solid and had a window in the kitchen that got morning light, which was the thing she'd specified when Diane's office had helped her with the lease. The one concrete aesthetic requirement she'd allowed herself, morning light. "I'm not ready for full section yet," she said. "Half section, lunch only, to start." She looked at the kitchen window, the morning light on the sill. "Give me 3 weeks," she said. "2," he said, "and I'm giving you Thursdays." She understood what he meant. Thursdays were Nikolai's standing reservation. "Marcus," she said. "It's your call," he said. "It's always been your call. I'm just telling you what's available." She sat with that. 2 weeks, she said. "Lunch only." "Good," he said. "And Alara." A pause. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about him coming in, the time he came and asked." "I know," she said. "It's all right." "It's not, really." "No," she said. "But it's done." She hung up. She called Nikolai that evening. Not Roman. Nikolai directly, the number she'd had since the third Thursday, the one she'd memorized and never used for anything except that one night. The night she'd sent "I need to leave." She called it now, and he answered on the second ring, and she could hear in the half-second of ambient sound before he spoke that he was somewhere with other people, some background conversation, a room in operation. "Alara," he said, "are you busy?" "Give me a minute." She heard him move, a door, and then quiet. "All right." "I'm coming back to the restaurant," she said. "In 2 weeks." A pause. "Good. Thursdays are my section." Another pause. Shorter. "I heard." "I wanted to tell you directly," she said. So you didn't arrive on a Thursday and find me there without warning." "I appreciate that." She looked at the kitchen window. Dark now, the light long gone. The street outside the front windows making its usual noise. "I've been thinking," she said. "About what?" "About what you said. In the kitchen." She kept her voice even. Not managed even. The professional composure. Actually even. The way things were even when they'd been looked at directly and accepted. "About what I said back." He was quiet. Not a tense quiet. Just present. "I don't know what I'm ready for," she said. "I want to be honest about that. I'm 60 days from a divorce being finalized, and I'm 2 weeks from going back to work, and there are nights where I wake up and check the door locks, and I'm not entirely sure why." She paused. "I wanted you to know that I meant what I said, and that I also need to figure out what I mean by it when it's not 11 at night in a kitchen after the worst day of my life." He was quiet for a moment. "That's the most reasonable thing anyone has ever said to me," he said. She almost smiled. Felt the shape of it moving across her face in the dark kitchen. "I thought you might think it was complicated." "It's honest," he said. "I'll take honest over easy every time." A pause. "Alara, I'm not going anywhere. I'm also not waiting in the specific way that creates pressure. I'm just here, however that's useful." She looked at the window. "Thursday in 2 weeks," she said. "I'll be there," he said. She lowered the phone and sat in the kitchen in the dark, and felt the particular quality of the quiet that existed when the thing you were afraid to say had been said and the world had not collapsed around it. Just the dark, just the street noise, just the morning light that would come through the window in about 9 hours, whether anything else was resolved or not. She went to bed and slept without checking the locks twice. 63 days after Trent Holloway signed the papers, on a January morning so cold the city's exhaled breath hung visible in the air above the sidewalks, Diane Chu called and said 3 words. "It's finalized. Done." Alara was walking to the bus stop. The bus stop she walked to now was on a different line in a different neighborhood, and she had learned its rhythm over the last 2 months. The 7:42 that ran on time, and the 7:51 that never did. The particular regulars she nodded to. the newspaper box on the corner with the scratched plastic window. She had learned the rhythm the way she'd learned all the rhythms of the new life. Slowly, deliberately, without the survival coding that had made every previous routine feel like a contingency plan. She stopped on the sidewalk. "Done," she said. "Finalized and recorded," Diane said. "The restraining order is permanent. If he violates it, contact, proximity, third-party communication, call me first, then the police." "I know." "You're also cleared on the name restoration. Voss, as of today, if you want it." She stood on the sidewalk in the January cold with her breath visible in the air in front of her, and she thought about the name. Voss. She'd been Holloway for 3 years and Voss for 28 before that, and the name felt like putting on a coat she'd taken off in a hurry and found hung exactly where she'd left it, a little cold from the time without her in it, but otherwise intact, otherwise hers. "Yes," she said. "I want it." "Done," Diane said again. "Take care of yourself, Alara." "I will," she said. And meant it specifically, not as a social formula, but as an actual commitment to an actual practice that she had been slowly, carefully, imperfectly building for 2 months. The eating at the right hours, the sleeping without the door lock ritual, the graphic design work that had expanded from one small restaurant branding job to 3 projects, and the beginning of a small professional identity being reconstructed from its foundations. The twice-weekly sessions with a therapist named Dr. Keene, whose office smelled of coffee and who had the useful quality of not letting her manage the conversation. She put the phone in her pocket. She stood on the sidewalk in the cold. Alara Voss. She tried it in her head the way you tried on the weight of something. Alara Voss, who was 31 years old and lived in Lincoln Square in a 1-bedroom with morning light in the kitchen window and a graphic design portfolio being rebuilt from scratch, and a Thursday evening standing reservation she was finally beginning to understand as something other than the most complicated thing in her life. She walked to the bus stop. She got on the 742. She returned to Belladonna on a Wednesday, which was a choice she'd made deliberately, not the Thursday, not with Nikolai present for the first re-entry, but a Wednesday lunch service with a half section and Marcus at the host stand when she came through the door, who looked at her and said nothing for a moment and then said, "Coat rack's where it was," which was the most Marcus thing he could have said and exactly what she needed. She put her coat on the rack. She changed into her service uniform in the staff room and stood in front of the mirror above the small sink, a functional mirror, no crack, adequate light, and looked at herself. She looked at herself for a long time. Not the assessment, not the coverage check, not the professional inventory of presentation. She just looked at the face that had learned to become a surface and was learning, slowly, imperfectly, to be a face again. At the eyes that were tired in a different way now. Not the survival tired, the constant allocation of resources tired, but the ordinary tired of someone who had been through something significant and was on the other side of it and was dealing with the ordinary aftermath of that. At the line of her jaw, the set of her mouth, she thought about the mirror in the apartment on Devon, the cracked one, with its particular quality of fracturing her reflection into 2 offset versions of herself. She thought about standing in front of it in the early mornings doing the coverage work, the performance of normalcy, the construction of the face that could go into the world and function without revealing the cost of the night before. She thought, that was real. It happened. I am not the same person who stood in front of that mirror. She thought, I am also still that person because you don't stop being what you've survived. You just stop being only that. She put her apron on and went out to her section. Thursday arrived. She was in the dining room at 7:15 when the door opened and he came in. Same as always, unhurried, the particular economy of movement, the room adjusting slightly without announcing it. His usual table, corner, back to the wall. She let one of the other servers take the water service to the other tables, and she picked up the pitcher and walked to the corner. He looked up when she reached the table. She looked at him. Something moved between them in the 3 seconds before either of them spoke. Not the careful, measured exchange of the first Thursdays, not the weighted subtext of the weeks that followed. Something simpler and more direct, the way things were direct when they'd been through enough together to stop requiring performance. "You're back," he said. "I'm back," she said. He held her gaze. His face did the thing it sometimes did, the watchfulness opening very slightly, like a window opened a fraction, letting a particular quality of light through that wasn't visible any other way. "How does it feel?" he said. And it wasn't a pleasantry. It was the actual question. She looked around the dining room, at its warm light, its quiet hum of voices, its 42 tables with their particular human traffic of people sharing meals and conversations, and the ordinary, extraordinary experience of being in a room that worked. She looked at the service station where she'd stood hundreds of times with the water pitcher and the professional composure and the face built for surviving. She looked at the window facing the street, where the January dark outside made the interior golden by contrast. "Like mine," she said. He looked at her. "It feels like mine," she said. "Not the restaurant, not the room, the feeling, the standing in the room, the being present in her own life without the constant overhead cost of managing someone else's danger." He nodded slowly, the window in his face open. "Water," he said. She poured it. She moved through the service with the ease of someone returned to a competence they'd never actually lost, just temporarily operated at a fraction of. And when she brought his food, she set it down, and when she refilled the water, she did it without comment. And when he finished, she brought the check, and he signed it, and she picked it up, and she didn't look at the margin until she was back at the service station. One line. His tight, even handwriting. "March. If you want dinner, just dinner, tell me." She held the receipt. She looked at the corner table where he was finishing the last of his wine, his eyes on the window, the city outside, the same watchful quality that had first seen her through every mask she'd built. She thought about March, 2 months away. The ordinary distance of an ordinary plan made between two people who had survived enough to have the luxury of ordinary plans. She thought about the kitchen table, his hand over her shaking ones, the stopped rain. She pulled out her order pad. She wrote 3 words on a clean slip and walked back to the table and set it down beside his empty glass and walked away without waiting to see him read it. 3 words. March. Tell me. In the weeks that followed, the city moved through its winter and began, grudgingly, to concede towards spring. Ilara's graphic design work grew. The 3 clients became 5. The restaurant in Wicker Park opened and used her branding on everything. Menus, signage, the social presence, and sent photographs that she looked at for a long time on her laptop in the kitchen with the morning light coming through the window. She was not the artwork. She had made the artwork. The distinction was enormous. She thought about the DePaul classes she'd left, the junior year she'd walked out of when Trent had needed her available in a way that had seemed at the time like a reasonable temporary thing. She looked up continuing education programs. She thought about it for 2 weeks. She enrolled. Dr. Keene, in their Tuesday sessions, did not congratulate her effusively. She said, "How does that feel?" The way she always said it, the same question Nikolai had asked at Belladonna, the same question that kept requiring her to actually look at what was happening inside her rather than producing the correct answer. "Terrifying," Ilara said, "and like something I should have done a long time ago." "Both things," Dr. Keene said. "Both things," she agreed. Her mother called from Phoenix on a Saturday morning in February. They'd spoken twice since the night Ilara had walked out of the apartment. Short calls, careful, the particular caution of a relationship that had been managed at a protective distance for too long and was now attempting to find its actual footing without the management. Her mother's name was Carol, and she was 63, and she had her own history, her own years of certain specific silences, which was perhaps why she had not pushed harder during the 3 years, and perhaps why she understood, without being told the full architecture of it, what the careful distance had been about. "Are you okay?" her mother said. Not the way people said it when they expected the answer fine. The other way. "Yes," Ilara said. "Actually, yes." A pause. "I'd like to come visit," her mother said. "When you're ready. No rush." Ilara looked at the kitchen window. February light, thinner than January's, the first suggestion of something changing in the angle of it. "April," she said. "Come in April." "April," her mother said, like an agreement made on solid ground. But March arrived. They had dinner at a restaurant that was neither Belladonna nor anywhere either of them had been before. A choice she'd made deliberately, a neutral ground, a new place. Italian, small, on a residential street in Andersonville. The kind of place that took reservations for Tuesday nights and ran out of the fish special by 8. She arrived first and was seated when he came in, and she watched him cross the room toward her with the particular quality of attention she'd spent months learning to trust. Not the attention of someone managing a situation, not the attention of someone running a calculation, just the specific undivided attention of a person arriving somewhere they want to be. He sat down. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. They looked at each other across the small table in the warm light of a Tuesday night in March, and the silence between them had none of the weight it once carried. None of the subtext, none of the careful management, none of the freight of everything pending and unresolved. Just the simple silence of two people sitting down together. "You look different," he said. "Different how?" He considered it. "Like you're actually here," he said. She understood what he meant. "I'm working on it," she said, "Baum, being here. I'm better at it than I was." "I know." He picked up the menu. "I've been watching." "I know you have," she said. "I've been watching you watch." He looked up from the menu. Something in his face did the window thing. She picked up her own menu. They ordered, they ate, they talked the way people talked when they'd been through something significant together, and were now finding out who they were to each other on the other side of it, carefully at first, and then less carefully, and then not carefully at all. The conversation ranging through the ordinary topography of two people learning each other's actual content. The Russian city he'd grown up in and hadn't been back to in 20 years, the graphic design work she was rebuilding, and the DePaul night classes that started in the fall, the specific way he took his coffee, and the specific way she didn't cook anything requiring more than one pan, the book he'd read twice, and the film she'd walked out of twice, and the neighborhood they'd both separately identified as the best in the city for walking when you needed the city's particular brand of company without actual company. The restaurant filled up around them. The fish special ran out at 7:45. They stayed until the place began its quiet process of clearing for the night, and then they walked out into the March air, which was cold, but with a different quality of cold than January. The cold that was already anticipating its own ending, the cold that had begun to carry within it the distant structural suggestion of warmth. They stood on the sidewalk. She looked at him. He looked at her. "I don't want to go home yet," she said. "Neither do I," he said. They walked. No destination, no plan, the city moving around them in its particular Friday-adjacent Tuesday night energy. The restaurants open, the bars lit, the lake somewhere behind the buildings making its perpetual cold insistence on existing. They walked north and then east, and at some point she put her hand through his arm the way you did in cold weather, and he didn't make it into anything, just adjusted slightly so the fit was better and kept walking. She thought about a cracked mirror in an apartment she no longer lived in. She thought about a service station in a warm restaurant where she'd stood with her back to the room learning to breathe. She thought about a kitchen table and shaking hands and a man who covered them without gripping them and the stopped rain. She thought about the specific quality of a life being rebuilt rather than survived. The difference in the grain of it, the difference in the forward direction, the way a rebuilt thing was not the original thing and was not trying to be, and was therefore in some way that required the whole experience of losing the original to understand better. She looked up at the city's skyline against the March dark, its particular cut against the low clouds. The lights of it reflected in the lake she could feel more than see. She thought, "I am here. I am actually here." Nikolai said nothing. He walked beside her in the cold with his hands in his pockets, and her hand through his arm and his eyes on the street ahead, and the quality of his presence was the thing it had always been, solid, unhurried, the patience that wasn't waiting for anything but was just there. And she felt it not as a weight or an obligation or a structure built around her, but as the simple, reliable fact of another person choosing to be in the same place. She thought about the ring she'd seen once, months from now, on a Thursday evening in the warm light of belladonna. She couldn't know this yet, but she would remember it later, when it happened, as something that had been moving toward her since the first night she'd picked up a water pitcher and walked toward a corner table. She would remember thinking, "I know this feeling." Not the fear of it, not the performance of readiness, just the knowing. The simple, unglamorous, hard-won knowing of a woman who had looked at herself in enough mirrors, cracked and whole, with concealer, and without, in the honest light of morning and the flattering light of restaurant dining rooms, to understand the difference between what she was told she was and what she actually was. But that was later. Now there was just the March night and the cold air and the city moving around them without stopping for anyone, the way it always had, the way it always would, and the two of them walking through it with the specific unhurried quality of people who had stopped running from something and hadn't yet started running toward anything in particular, and were finding, in that space between, something that neither of them had been certain they still knew how to want. Not safety, exactly. Safety was too small a word for it. Not happiness, exactly. Happiness was too easy. Something more like presence, the actual experience of being in a life, being inside it rather than managing it from a careful external distance. The specific weight and texture and temperature of a Tuesday night in March, with cold air on your face and a city around you that doesn't care whether you make it but doesn't stop you from making it either. She held his arm. He walked beside her. The city went on. 6 months later, Belladonna received a small, framed piece of graphic design art from an anonymous source, a stylized rendering of the restaurant's facade in clean modern lines, sent without explanation. Marcus hung it in the entry hallway near the coat rack, where it caught the light from the dining room door. He knew who it was from. He didn't say anything. He left it where the light was good.